The soft hum of fluorescent lights hovered above like a lullaby for the dead. The mortuary was steel, insulated from the noise of the living. Outside, rain pressed gently against the high, narrow windows, more a suggestion than a sound. The mortician pulled on gloves with practiced ease, the snap barely breaking the silence. Their breath, even and slow, fogged briefly on the cool steel of the table as they leaned forward. The sheet was drawn back with care. Not ceremony, not ritual, just care. They always started at the face. There was nothing particularly remarkable about it anymore. The expression had gone slack in that universal way, as if the features themselves had given up on holding on to identity. The mortician tilted their heads slightly, observing. Not for flaws, not for art, but for something closer to recognition. But the moment passed. It always passed. A small cloth, dipped in warm water and lavender oil, pressed gently to skin that no longer resisted or responded. The mortician's hand moved in soft circles across the forehead, the cheeks, down the jaw. Delicate, like cleaning dust from an old photograph. They worked quietly, reverently, each motion a whisper.
You came here in the end, like they all do.
The mortician said, their voice barely audible, lost to the rhythm of ritual.
Whatever you were before. It's not for me to know, is it?
The body didn't answer. That was the comfort and the cruelty of this job. The mortician reached for the small scissors. Stray hairs were trimmed, eyebrows gently shaped. The eyes had long since been closed, sealed with a touch of gel and tenderness, though the mortician still paused before brushing a finger across the lids.
I hope someone held your hand.
They murmured.
Or told you it was okay to let go.
They shifted focus to the hands, folded now, clean, resting one over the other. There was always something about the hands that pulled at them. Not just the age written in the veins or fine lines, but what they once held, whom they once touched. The mortician allowed a moment here, lingering over knuckles and half-moon nails.
I wonder who will weep for you tomorrow. Who will pretend they're fine? Who will carry you in their silence after they've gone back to their lives?
The clothes had been laid out earlier. Dark, elegant, impersonal. The kind of final outfit chosen with compromise and care. The mortician slipped each piece on like dressing a statue. Mindful of buttons, seams, the quiet dignity of the task. When they were finished, they stepped back, eyes searching again for something. Closure, understanding, maybe just peace. They didn't find it, but they never really did.
You're ready now.
The mortician whispered. They placed one last white flower at the side of the pillow, always the same kind. Not for the dead, not really, for the space between. And then they turned away, glancing once more at the body as they walked to the door, leaving behind the hum of lights and the scent of lavender and endings. The mortician didn't leave right away. They stood at the edge of the preparation room, one hand still resting on the door frame, eyes drawn back to the figure laying on the table. There was a stillness in the air that didn't feel quite finished. A sensation, soft as breath, that something remained undone. Their hand fell from the door. They stepped back in. The fluorescent lights cast the same sterile glow, but something about it felt more forgiving now. Less clinical, more like a stage light dimming before curtain close. The mortician moved toward the head of the table, adjusting the pillows slightly. No one would notice, but they would. They leaned in, this time not to inspect or tidy, but just to be close.
I always wonder,
They said, their voice softer than before.
if I'm the last one to see you as, well, you.
They brushed a bit of the lint from the shoulder of the coat. The gesture felt maternal, or maybe priestly, or maybe it was just muscle memory from a job where the hands learned more than the heart ever dared to.
You were someone. You were loved, I hope. Or feared, or needed, or missed. You walked through someone's dream once, didn't you?
Silence answered, like it always did. But the mortician didn't mind. They sat on the small stool at the foot of the table and looked at the polished shoes, carefully fitted onto feet that would never take another step. The laces were tied with quiet precision. The mortician's eyes traced them, as if they were lines of a poem they hadn't yet understood.
Sometimes I think you can hear me.
They said.
Not with ears, just some part of you. The part of you that's already somewhere else.
They didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. But they believed in echoes. The way grief held on to the air long after people had left the room. The way some bodies felt heavy with stories, others light with peace. This one hadn't told them yet. They stood. One last look. Not for imperfections, just for presence.
Are they still here?
The mortician stepped close again and reached out. Not to fix anything. Not to work. But simply to lay their hand gently over the cold one's folded on the chest. Maybe just for a moment.
There you are.
They whispered. Then they turned away. This time, they did leave. This time, the door closed behind them. And the room, now filled with flowers, lavender, and the faint warmth of a goodbye, returned to stillness. The elevator let out its tired groan as it reached the lower level. The mortician stepped off without hesitation, the soles of their shoes making soft sounds against the polished concrete. Down here, there was no ambient music, no flowers, no windows, only the hushed cold of air and the quiet hum of refrigeration units. The steel doors of the cold chamber slid open with a mechanical sigh. Rows of compartments lined the walls, each marked with a number, not a name. The newest arrival waited on a gurney at the far end, still zipped in a white vinyl pouch. The kind of silence that surrounds the dead wasn't just absence. It had a weight, like a blanket soaked in rain. The mortician approached. Place a hand on the pouch. Not to unzip it, not yet. Just to acknowledge the presence inside. Not an object. A life paused mid-sentence.
You're here now.
They murmured.
And I'll see to you.
Unzipping the pouch was never mechanical. It was intimate. Like opening a letter you knew would contain pain, but you read it anyway. The face inside was slack, pale, not yet prepared. The mortician studied it with the soft patience of someone reacquainting themselves with grief. They reached for a clipboard and glanced over the file. Time of death, cause, found alone. The rest was sterile, administrative. Not a single word about who this person was when they laughed. Not a single note about the way they tilted their head when listening. Just facts. Just silence. The mortician spoke to fill the void.
Sometimes the family sends photos. Tells us what you liked. The way you wore your hair, favorite tie. Sometimes they don't send anything at all.
They paused, setting the clipboard aside.
Sometimes I think people vanish twice. First, when they die, and again when no one remembers how it is that they lived.
There was a small scar on the left cheek, nearly hidden beneath the stubble. A story, no doubt, but one the mortician would never know. Still, they noticed. Still, they honored it. As they began to undress the body, hands working with practiced gentleness, the mortician found themselves humming. A slow, unfamiliar tune. Not for the dead, for themselves. Something to hold on to in the quiet.
Make you look like someone who mattered.
They whispered, as if promising not to let this person disappear entirely. Because down here, beneath the earth, where no one clapped or cried or called out names, the work wasn't about restoring life. It was about restoring dignity. And the mortician was very, very good at that. The faucet hissed to life, spilling warm water into the basin. The mortician tested it with a gloved hand, heat just high enough to soften, not to scald. A bottle of unscented soap was squeezed into the stream, clouds forming like breath on cold glass. They worked in silence, gathering soft cloths, combs, shears, everything they would need to make this person whole again. Even if only for one more viewing. Steam curled around their face as they returned to the table. The sting was still, now slightly fogged. The body, pale and unmoving, waited. The mortician cupped water in their palm and let it fall over the chest first. Then shoulders, arms, throat. Not splashed, poured. As if baptizing, though no scripture was read. Just breath and water and the ritual of care.
This isn't for you.
The mortician said quietly.
Not exactly. It's for the ones who still need to say goodbye.
They washed with slow, practiced motions. Hair was dampened, combed back. Nails were trimmed. The face, still a stranger's face, was tended with the same reverence they'd given to someone they'd loved. That was the discipline of the work. Grief was not required to show up and do it right. Only respect. As they reached for the smaller container of restorative balm, their fingers trembled slightly. They paused.
I had a brother,
they whispered, unsure why they were saying it or to whom.
He died on a Tuesday. No one touched him after. No one claimed him. They just left him the way they found him.
They massaged the balm gently across the skin, working it into the cheeks, the forehead, around the mouth where life once gathered in smiles or sighs or scorn. Each stroke quieted something old in them, though they didn't know what.
Ever since then,
they continued,
I promised I wouldn't let anyone go out like that. Not if I could help it.
They worked the balm down to the hands, folded, pale, cold, but still hands. They belonged to someone. Someone who had waited in lines and held cups of coffee and brushed hair from a lover's face. These hands had lived. And now they lay still.
I don't know what you lost,
the mortician said.
But I know what you'll leave behind.
They looked up, past the body, past the room, to nothing in particular.
It's never nothing. It's never nothing, no matter what anyone says.
Silence came, heavy and unbroken. They reached for the clothing laid out on a nearby table, pressed earlier, neat as a pressed leaf in an old book. Simple, appropriate. There was a kind of grace in simplicity. As the mortician began to dress the body, the door behind them creaked gently. Not from someone entering, but from the building settling. Or maybe it was something else. The air sometimes moved like that around the dead, like someone had taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. The mortician didn't look back. They fastened buttons, adjusted cuffs, smoothed the fabric. No wasted motion. Then, finally, they sat back. The transformation was complete. Not resurrection, not magic, but recognition. A person ready to be mourned. A story dressed for its final telling. The funeral began without music. There were no strings, no organ, no carefully cued playlists, just the hush of shuffling shoes and the hollow acoustics of a chapel too large for the handful who'd come. The mortician stood in the back, behind the last row of pews, hands folded in front, unnoticed, as always. And that was how they preferred it. The casket sat open at the front, framed by muted flowers and flickering candles. None scented. Scent was memory, and memory was dangerous in places like this. It could crack someone open without warning. One by one, people approached. A man in a dark suit with 2 short sleeves. A woman whose hand never left her necklace. A boy no older than 16 kept his eyes on the floor, like the ground might split if he looked up. The mortician watched the mourners watch the body. Every tilt of a head, every quiver of a jawline was familiar. Grief played the same notes in 100 different songs. The man reached out, touched the cold fingers, whispered something only the dead could hear. The woman adjusted a lapel that didn't need adjusting. The boy just stood there, silent, until the woman gently guided him away. The mortician closed their eyes. They had done well. The body looked peaceful, dignified. Not someone who had simply fallen asleep in their best clothes. They always strived for that. Not beauty, not perfection. Peace. A hand brushed the mortician's arm. Startled, they turned, and there she was. Middle-aged, coat damp from the rain. Eyes rimmed with red, but dry now. She gave a small, apologetic smile, like she hadn't meant to interrupt someone else's grief.
Are you the one who...
She asked softly, gesturing toward the front. The mortician nodded once. She looked at the casket again.
They looked like themselves. Better than I remember, honestly.
The mortician said nothing, just waited. The woman hesitated. Her voice dropped.
I was angry with them when they left. We hadn't spoken in years. Thought I'd be fine with that, but now...
She trailed off. The silence didn't need filling. After a long moment, she asked,
Do you talk to them when you do your work?
The mortician considered this, then nodded again.
Do they ever...
She caught herself, embarrassed.
Never mind. They don't answer.
The mortician said, voice quiet. The woman gave a brittle laugh.
No. I suppose they wouldn't.
She looked again at the casket, then back.
But thank you for treating them like they mattered.
And just like that, she was gone. Back to the pews, back to the living. The mortician remained where they were, listening as the officiant stepped forward and cleared his throat. The service began. But the mortician wasn't listening. Not to the words. They were listening for something else. Sometimes it came in the sigh of the candles. Sometimes in the way light filtered through stained glass onto the polished wood. And sometimes in the voice of someone like that woman. Someone living, who had come hoping to say something they never got to. That, the mortician thought, was who their work was really for. Not the dead, but the ones who still carry them. The mortician remained at the back long after the service ended. The chapel emptied in careful, uneven waves. Quiet hugs, murmured regrets, footsteps soft as apologies. The boy was the last to leave, hesitating near the casket, his hand gripping the edge like it might anchor him. He looked as though he wanted to say something, maybe scream it. But instead, He just nodded once. A gesture so small, it barely disturbed the air. Then he was gone too. The silence returned. The kind the mortician knew intimately. They walked slowly toward the front. The candles burned lower now. Their scentless flames danced only for the absent. They looked down at the face they had worked on with such care. There was something different about it now. Not a change of the features, they remained composed, serene. But the presence behind them had dimmed, as if the last fragments of spirit had finally heard what they needed to, and slipped out the back door.
Good,
the mortician said, almost under their breath. They took a seat in the front pew. It was rare they allowed themselves this, sitting where the mourners had sat. It felt too much like crossing a boundary. But something about the woman's voice, the way it cracked when she said thank you, had stayed with them. They sat there, watching the flicker of the candles, hands resting quietly in their lap. For a moment, they let themselves feel the weight of everything they'd held that week. 4 viewings, 2 cremations, 1 suicide, 1 child, 1 man who died alone, whose body was found only because a neighbor's dog wouldn't stop barking. All of them had passed through their hands, and all of them had left something behind. The mortician leaned forward, elbows on knees, face in hands, just for a moment. Not to cry, not exactly, just to feel, like pressing fingers into a bruise to make sure it's real. They didn't believe in ghosts, but in that moment, they imagined each of them sitting in the pews behind them, quiet and composed, not haunting, just present, like a congregation of stories that only the dead could tell.
I remember you,
the mortician whispered to the room. They stood slowly, joints stiff from stillness. It was time to close the casket. One final gesture. Not a sealing of death, but a promise that nothing more would be taken. Now what remained would be honored. The lid lowered with a hush of hinges and the soft click of closure. The mortician stood beside it for a moment longer, hand resting on the polished wood. They thought of the woman, the boy, the way the living carried their grief like an invisible heirloom, passed from generation to generation, never fully unpacked. Then they whispered again, the words not for the dead, but for themselves.
You mattered.
The mortician was eating soup from a chipped white bowl when the phone rang. It was late, past the hour for condolences, earlier than the hour for ghosts. The kind of hour where the world went quiet enough to hear things you'd rather forget. Outside, wind scratched softly against the window panes, and somewhere, in the distance, a train moaned as it cut through the darkness. They didn't flinch, just set the spoon down and reached for the receiver.
Evening,
they said. Their voice was always steady, even when their hands weren't. A dispatcher's voice crackled through, tired and flat.
Pick up on Ridge Hollow Road. Sheriff's on scene. No next of kin.
The mortician wrote it down with a pencil, already worn to its knob.
Estimated time of death?
They asked.
Maybe 6 hours. He was found by a neighbor. No signs of trauma. Probably natural.
The line went quiet for a moment. Then,
You okay to take this one alone?
I always do.
the mortician replied. They dressed in layers, the night biting through fabric, as if trying to get under their skin. The hearse's engine stuttered once, then settled into a low, growling hum. The road out of town was empty, save for the occasional flicker of headlights from passing trucks. No one looked directly at the hearse. People never did. Ridge Hollow was 20 minutes out. A scatter of houses too stubborn to admit they were lonely. When they pulled up, the sheriff's cruiser was already parked, headlights casting long skeletal shadows through the trees. The mortician stepped out, boots crunching gravel, and the cold rushed into their lungs like old regret. The sheriff met them halfway down the drive. He didn't offer a handshake, just a nod.
Back bedroom. Quiet fella. Lived alone.
They walked in silence, past unwashed dishes and dust-heavy curtains. The house smelled of something faint and sweet, like rotting apples or forgotten perfume. The body lay on the bed, covers pulled up as if he'd simply gone to sleep and missed the memo about not waking up. The mortician stood there for a long moment, staring at the shape beneath the quilt. He wasn't young, that much was clear. The room was filled with books, some left open mid-sentence as though he just stepped away to think. A small glass of water sat on the nightstand. No photo frames, no letters. Just the remnants of a life that had grown quiet long before the heart stopped. The sheriff scratched the back of his neck.
He wrote poetry, I think. Found some notebooks in the drawer. Kinda private, though. You want 'em?
The mortician looked down at the body.
I'll take them.
They said softly.
It's all that's left.
And with that, they began the work. The body was moved carefully, respectfully, as though it might still bruise. Outside, the wind howled a little louder, like the trees were complaining. The sheriff stayed quiet, watching from the porch as the mortician loaded the stretcher into the back of the hearse. Before the doors closed, the mortician paused. Something in the air felt unfinished. They turned back to the house, walking inside once more, and this time stood in the center of the bedroom. Just stood, listening. It was quiet, but not empty. They reached into the drawer, retrieved the notebooks, and tucked them into their coat.
You don't have to be forgotten.
They whispered, to no one and to everyone. Then they shut the lights off, one by one, and drove the man back into town. The mortician drove slowly back toward town, headlights carving a pale path through the thickening fog. The notebooks rested on the passenger seat, their worn leather bindings soft from years of handling. Every so often, the mortician's hand brushed against them, as if feeling the pulse of someone long gone. Back at the mortuary, the building felt colder than usual. The hum of the refrigeration units echoed like distant thunder. The mortician set the notebooks carefully on the steel table, then pulled the cover off the stretcher. They worked methodically, removing the quilt and folding it with care. The man's face was pale, but peaceful, shadowed in the dim light. The mortician's fingers lingered on the jawline, tracing the line of a life now past. They dressed him simply. No frills, no attempts to mask the quiet dignity the man carried in death. When the body was ready, the mortician returned to the notebooks. Opening the first one, they were met with jagged handwriting. Ink faded, but still legible. Poems that spoke of loneliness, of nights spent chasing stars just beyond reach, of dreams that slipped away like smoke. A line caught their eye.
In the silence between heartbeats, I listen for a voice I once knew.
The mortician read on, each poem a thread weaving a picture of a man who had lived unseen, but who had felt everything deeply. Hours passed unnoticed. The cold room grew colder. The notebook pages turned, revealing fragments of hope and despair, of love lost and found only in dreams. The mortician paused on one final poem, folded into the back, like a secret.
If I am to be forgotten, let it be with kindness. Let the wind carry my name softly, like a whisper no one hears, but once.
They closed the notebook gently. Outside, dawn was bleeding into the sky, soft pinks and grays mixing in quiet grace. The mortician stood alone with the poet's story, feeling the weight of a name they would never speak aloud, but would carry nonetheless. The first light of dawn filtered through the mortuary's narrow windows, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. The mortician sat alone at a cluttered desk, a faint scent of coffee lingering in the air, untouched. The notebooks lay open before them, words spilling like whispered confessions into the quiet room. Outside, the world was waking. Birds stirring, distant engines roaring to life. But inside, time felt suspended, stretched thin like the fragile pages they turned. The mortician's fingers traced the ink, pausing at lines that spoke of regret, longing, and hope folded tightly within solitude. Names were never spoken here. Names belonged to the living, to stories yet unfinished. But in these poems, a soul breathed, aching to be remembered. A gentle knock broke the stillness. The mortician looked up, startled. The door creaked open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the growing light. A woman, her eyes shadowed with fatigue and something like recognition.
I'm so sorry to bother you so early,
She said, voice soft but steady.
I heard you might have the notebooks.
The mortician regarded her quietly, noting the tremor in her hands, the weight of unspoken memories. They gestured to the table without a word. She stepped forward, eyes falling on the open pages, lips moving as if reading a silent prayer.
Hey, he was my uncle.
She said finally, voice catching.
We lost touch years ago. I never thought I'd find anything like this.
The mortician nodded, the room thick with a fragile thread of connection between the living and the dead, the forgotten and the remembered.
Sometimes,
the mortician said, voice low,
the stories left behind are the only way we hold on.
The woman looked up, meeting their gaze.
Thank you.
And, for the first time in a long while, the mortician felt the quiet stir of something like hope. The woman hesitated, then took a seat at the edge of the desk. Her fingers brushed lightly over the worn pages, as though afraid to disturb the fragile truth they held. The morning light caught the glint of tears threatening to spill.
They never told me much about him.
She said quietly.
Just that he was different. Quiet. Kinda lost, I guess. We stopped talking after the funeral for my father.
The mortician listened, knowing better than to rush or fill the silence.
He wrote these poems?
She asked, voice trembling slightly.
Most of them.
The mortician replied.
They tell what no one said aloud.
She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the words.
I think he wanted someone to know. To understand.
The mortician stood and walked to the small window, gazing out at the waking town.
Sometimes it's the living who need reminding that love doesn't just disappear just because someone's gone.
The woman looked up, searching her face.
Have you ever lost someone like that?
She asked. The mortician's eyes darkened for a moment. The weight of unspoken grief settling in.
Many.
They said.
And many more who lost themselves long before.
The woman smiled faintly, wiping a tear from her cheek.
I'd like to take these.
She said.
To keep them safe, to share them.
The mortician nodded.
Sometimes. That's the best way to make sure a story doesn't end.
They watched her leave, the notebooks tucked close to her heart. Alone once more, the mortician returned to the desk. The room seemed a little less cold, the dawn a little less distant. And somewhere, between the living and the dead, a story found its breath.